Riley groaned as he cracked open his eyes, the harsh fluorescent lights of the workshop stabbing at his retinas. His head throbbed like it had been used as a drum by a particularly angry alien musician. Blinking through the haze, he tried to sit up but found himself glued to the floor by an inexplicable weight pressing down on his chest. "What the?" he muttered, squinting down at the source of his discomfort. There, sprawled across his toolbox like a drunk raccoon nesting in trash, was Zyra, his alien nurse. Her long, iridescent limbs were awkwardly entangled with the scattered wrenches and spanners, her shimmering teal hair splayed in every direction. One of her antennae twitched as if it were tuning into a particularly embarrassing frequency. Riley froze, his groggy mind struggling to process the scene before him. He tried to shuffle out from under her without disturbing the precarious balance of tools, but a wrench clattered to the floor. Zyra stirred, her large, iridescent eyes fluttering open. She looked at him, blinking slowly, before letting out a string of rapid alien syllables. Morning?" Riley offered weakly, his voice cracking. Zyra's cheeks flushed a soft lavender as she scrambled to sit up, wincing when her elbow hit a hammer. "Oh. Apologies. This is not what it looks like," she stammered, her voice a melodic mix of embarrassment and panic. "Well, it looks like you passed out on my tools," Riley deadpanned, brushing off a stray bolt from his chest. "Which, you know, isn't exactly the strangest thing that's happened around here, but it's definitely up there." Zyra's antennae drooped, and she clasped her hands together as if preparing for a solemn confession. It was my fault. I had to honor the tools. It is tradition." "Honor the tools?" Riley repeated, his eyebrows shooting up. He rubbed his temples, wondering if he was still drunk. "Care to explain what that means, or should I just assume this is some weird alien thing and call it a day?" Zyra hesitated, her gaze darting to the scattered tools. "In my culture," she began, her tone as serious as if she were delivering a medical diagnosis, "when one accidentally desecrates another's sacred implements, one must lie upon them as a gesture of atonement." Riley stared at her, mouth slightly agape. "Desecrate? Zyra, they're just tools. They're not sacred, they're greasy, and half of them are probably older than I am." She gasped, horrified. "But I spilled Raxan wine on them during the celebration. That is a grave dishonor. I had to cleanse my shame." Riley's lips twitched as he tried and failed to keep a straight face. "You're telling me you slept on my tools all night because you think spilling wine on them is some kind of cosmic sin?" Zyra nodded earnestly, her antennae bobbing. "Precisely. It was the only way to restore balance." Riley pinched the bridge of his nose, muttering under his breath about alien logic. "Okay, look. I appreciate the sentiment, but next time, maybe just clean them instead of nesting on them. Deal?" Zyra tilted her head, her lavender blush deepening. "Clean them? With water?" "Yeah, water. Maybe some soap if you're feeling fancy," Riley said, fighting back a grin. "You know, like how sane people deal with messes?" Her antennae perked up, and she nodded with the solemnity of someone accepting a royal decree. "I understand. I will cleanse them properly next time. I swear it on my honor as a nurse." Riley chuckled, shaking his head. "You're something else, Zyra. Seriously. But hey, thanks for the entertainment. Best hangover cure I've had in a while." Zyra's lips quirked into a small, sheepish smile. "You are welcome, I suppose. Though I still owe you an apology." "Don't worry about it," Riley said, waving her off as he started gathering his scattered tools. "Just promise me you'll leave the ritual cleansing to your people and let me handle my tools the human way." She nodded solemnly, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her uniform. "Agreed. I will not dishonor your methods again." Riley smirked, tossing a wrench into the toolbox. "Good. Now let's get out of here before anyone else sees us and starts spreading rumors." As they stood, Zyra's antennae twitched again, and she hesitated before speaking. "Riley, do humans truly find it strange to lie upon tools? Is it not considered intimate?" Riley choked on air, turning to her with wide eyes. Intimate? Zaira, no! That's not even close to what humans consider intimate. She tilted her head, genuinely curious. Then, what is? Riley froze, his face heating as he scrambled for an answer that wouldn't make things even weirder. You know what? Let's save that conversation for another time. Preferably never. Zaira's laugh was a melodic trill, and Riley found himself smiling despite himself. As they walked out of the workshop, he couldn't help but think that his life had gotten a lot more interesting since Zaira had entered it, awkward cultural misunderstandings and all. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't mind it one bit. Riley stared at Zaira, still trying to wrap his head around her explanation from earlier. Cultural differences were one thing, but this? This was next level. As they walked together toward the medbay's central hub, he couldn't help but steal glances at her. She seemed genuinely embarrassed, her antennae twitching nervously, but there was also a faint air of defiance, as though she firmly believed her actions were justified despite his amusement. So, Riley began, breaking the silence. Is this whole lying on tools thing common in your culture, or are you just giving me the deluxe treatment? Zaira's blush deepened to a soft lavender, and she clasped her hands together. It is not common, no. Only reserved for significant offenses. Most would not have spilled Raxan wine on another's sacred tools. They're not sacred, Riley interrupted, smirking. To you, perhaps, she replied with a dignified lift of her chin. But to me, they represented your craft, your livelihood. To dishonor them was to dishonor you. That required a proper apology. He couldn't help but laugh. You really take this stuff seriously, don't you? Of course, she said earnestly. Do humans not have similar customs? Do you not honor your tools? We honor them by using them, Riley said with a shrug. Not by turning them into mattresses. Zaira tilted her head, processing his words. I see. It is a practical approach. Perhaps I misunderstood the level of reverence you place on them. Understatement of the year, Riley muttered, shaking his head. But hey, I guess it's not every day you get an apology like that. Most people just say sorry and move on. Sorry, Zaira echoed, tasting the word as though it were foreign to her. Such a simple word. Does it truly carry enough weight to mend a mistake? Riley shrugged. Depends on the mistake, I guess. But yeah, most of the time, it does the job. Humans aren't big on grand gestures for little things. Zaira nodded thoughtfully, her antennae twitching again. Then I will endeavor to adopt this custom. If it will make me a better nurse and improve my interactions with humans, I am willing to learn. That's surprisingly open-minded of you, Riley admitted. Most people, alien or human, are pretty set in their ways. I am not most people, Zaira said simply, with a small, self-assured smile that caught Riley off guard. Before he could respond, a distant crash echoed down the corridor, followed by a string of curses in a language Riley didn't recognize. He groaned, pinching the bridge of his nose. Let me guess, another equipment failure? It is likely, Zaira said, already quickening her pace. This station's systems are antiquated. That's a polite way of saying they're held together with duct tape and prayer, Riley muttered, jogging to keep up with her. When they arrived at the source of the commotion, they found one of the medbay staff, a tall, bug-eyed alien named Threx, flailing helplessly beside a malfunctioning diagnostic console. Sparks flew from the panel, and the acrid smell of burnt circuits filled the air. Great, Riley said, surveying the damage. This is gonna take hours to fix. I will assist, Zaira offered, her tone resolute. Riley raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? Last time you assisted, I ended up having to redo half the work. I have learned from my mistakes, Zaira insisted, already reaching for a nearby toolkit. Riley sighed but didn't argue. He set to work, carefully dismantling the console while Zaira hovered nearby, handing him tools as he requested them. For a while, they worked in companionable silence, broken only by the occasional spark or hum of a reactivated circuit. You're actually not bad at this, Riley admitted after a while. Looks like you've been paying attention. I am a quick learner, Zaira said with a hint of pride. Though I must admit your tools are peculiar. Peculiar how? Riley asked, glancing at her. They are so imprecise, she said, holding up a wrench as though it were a relic from an ancient civilization. On my homeworld, we use tools that adapt to the task at hand. They reshape themselves as needed. Riley snorted. That sounds nice, but where's the fun in that? Half the challenge is figuring out which tool to use. Challenge? Zaira repeated, genuinely puzzled. Why would you want to make your work more difficult? It's not about difficulty, Riley explained. It's about the satisfaction of solving a problem. When you use the right tool for the job, it feels earned. Zaira considered this, her antennae twitching thoughtfully. I suppose I can understand that. It is analogous to medicine in a way. Each patient requires a unique approach, even if the tools are the same. Exactly, Riley said, flashing her a grin. See? You're getting the hang of it. Zaira smiled back, a rare, genuine expression that softened her usually serious demeanor. Riley found himself momentarily distracted by the way her eyes seemed to catch the light, shimmering with an otherworldly glow. He quickly shook off the thought, focusing back on the console. After a few more minutes of tinkering, the console beeped to life, its display flickering before stabilizing. Threx let out a relieved chirp, clapping his elongated hands together. Another crisis averted, Riley said, wiping his hands on his jumpsuit. You know, we make a pretty good team. Indeed, Zaira agreed, her smile lingering. Perhaps there is more to be learned from human methods than I initially thought. Riley chuckled. Stick with me, Zaira. I'll have you fixing consoles and cracking jokes like a pro in no time. I look forward to it, she said, her tone sincere. As they packed up their tools and headed back toward the workshop, Riley couldn't help but feel a small flicker of pride. For all the differences, Zaira was proving to be a surprisingly quick study, and, he admitted to himself, not the worst company he could ask for. Riley leaned against the edge of the repair bay, arms crossed, watching Zaira with a mix of amusement and trepidation. She was inspecting a spanner like it was an artifact from an ancient civilization, her delicate fingers tracing the grooves on its surface. Her intensity was both impressive and a little unnerving. So, are you gonna stare at that thing all day, or are we actually gonna get some work done? Riley teased, unable to resist. Zaira glanced up, her expression a mix of determination and mild embarrassment. I am attempting to familiarize myself with your tools. If I am to assist you effectively, I must understand them. Riley smirked. It's a spanner, Zaira. You don't need a deep philosophical connection with it to make it work. She narrowed her eyes, clearly unimpressed with his sarcasm. Mock me if you wish, but I believe understanding one's tools is essential for any craft. Fair enough, Riley conceded, pushing off the wall. But understanding them won't help if you don't know how to use them. Come on, let's see what you've got. He handed her a simple bolt and nut assembly, gesturing for her to tighten it with the spanner. Zaira took the tool with an air of solemnity, positioning it carefully over the bolt. She began to turn it the wrong way, her movements slow and deliberate. Other direction, Riley said, biting back a laugh. Zaira paused, frowning. Why must it be so specific? On my homeworld, tools adjust themselves automatically. Yeah, well, welcome to the human way of doing things, Riley replied, still grinning. We like to keep it simple. Or complicated, depending on how you look at it. Zaira adjusted her grip and tried again, this time successfully tightening the bolt. She glanced at Riley, her expression a mix of triumph and curiosity. I have completed the task. Was that satisfactory? Not bad for your first try, Riley admitted, clapping her on the shoulder. But let's see how you handle something a little trickier. He led her over to a malfunctioning hovercart, its stabilizers sparking intermittently. This thing's been acting up for weeks. Think you're up for the challenge? Zaira's antennae twitched in what Riley had come to recognize as her version of excitement. I accept. They worked side by side, Riley guiding Zyra through the process of diagnosing and repairing the cart. Her questions came fast and frequent, her curiosity seemingly endless. At one point, she accidentally triggered the stabilizers, causing the cart to lurch forward and nearly knock Riley off his feet. "Okay, maybe don't press random buttons," Riley said, his voice tinged with exasperation. "I was not pressing randomly," Zyra protested. "I was experimenting." "Experiment on something that doesn't move next time," Riley shot back, though he couldn't help but chuckle. Despite the mishap, they eventually got the cart back in working order. Zyra stepped back, her hands on her hips, looking genuinely pleased with herself. "You're a quick learner," Riley admitted, giving her a nod of approval. "I might even let you help me out more often." "Maybe. I would be honored," Zyra said, her tone as formal as ever. "And I appreciate your patience. You are an excellent teacher." Riley felt a flush of unexpected pride at her words. "Thanks. You're not so bad yourself. For someone who thought lying on tools was a good idea, anyway." Zyra's lavender blush returned, but she smiled nonetheless. "It was a cultural misunderstanding. One I will not repeat." "Good to hear," Riley said, grinning. "Though I have to admit, it made for a pretty funny story." They spent the rest of the afternoon tackling various repair jobs around the medbay, their banter growing more relaxed with each task. By the time they finished, Riley realized he was actually enjoying himself, a rare occurrence when it came to work. As they packed up their tools, Zyra turned to him, her expression serious. "Riley, may I ask you something?" "Shoot," he said, slinging his toolbox over his shoulder. "Why do humans value humor so highly?" she asked, her tone genuinely curious. "It seems to permeate every aspect of your interactions." Riley paused, caught off guard by the question. "I guess it's just how we deal with things. Life's messy, unpredictable, sometimes downright awful. Humor makes it bearable. It's how we connect, how we cope." Zyra considered this, her antennae twitching thoughtfully. "I see. In my culture, we prioritize efficiency and logic above all else. Humor is not often encouraged." "That sounds boring," Riley said bluntly. Zyra laughed, a light, melodic sound that caught Riley off guard. "Perhaps it is. But I think I am beginning to understand your perspective." "Glad to hear it," Riley said, smiling. "Stick with me, Zyra. I'll have you cracking jokes in no time." "I look forward to it," she replied, her smile lingering as they headed back to the workshop. For the first time since their strange partnership began, Riley felt like they were truly starting to click, and he couldn't help but wonder what other surprises she had in store. As the lunch hour approached, Riley's stomach growled loud enough to echo through the quiet corridor. He glanced over at Zyra, who was trailing behind him, clutching a data pad and still frowning at the tools she'd been studying all morning. "Lunch break," he said, breaking her concentration. "Let's go grab something before the cafeteria turns into a war zone." Zyra looked up, antennae twitching. "Lunch? Oh, yes. That is the midday sustenance ritual, correct?" "Yeah, ritual. Sure. Let's go with that," Riley replied with a smirk. When they entered the cafeteria, the familiar chaos of the medbay staff's lunch hour was already in full swing. Beings from dozens of species crowded the tables, their diverse meals emitting a cacophony of smells that ranged from tantalizing to outright nauseating. Riley grabbed a tray and made a beeline for his usual human-friendly options, while Zyra lingered near the alien food station, inspecting the offerings with great interest. "You sure about that?" Riley asked when he saw her pick up a bowl of something that looked like glowing orange sludge. "Pretty sure that stuff has a warning label on it. It is a delicacy on my homeworld," Zyra replied, her tone almost reverent. "It is called Raxan Ember Stew. It is said to invigorate the mind and body." "Yeah, it'll invigorate your insides right out of you," Riley muttered, shaking his head. "Good luck with that." They found an open table and sat down, Riley digging into his simple sandwich while Zyra carefully unsealed the lid of her stew. The moment the container opened, a pungent, spicy aroma wafted across the table, causing Riley to choke on his bite. Holy, what is that? Did something die in there? He asked, waving his hand in front of his face. Zyra blinked at him, confused. This aroma is considered highly desirable. On my world, the stronger the scent, the better the quality. Yeah, well, on my world, we call that a biohazard, Riley quipped. Seriously, how do you even eat that without passing out? Zyra ignored him, lifting a spoonful of the glowing stew to her lips. Her eyes fluttered shut as she tasted it, a contented sigh escaping her. Magnificent, she murmured, as though savoring the finest delicacy in the galaxy. Riley watched in morbid fascination as she continued eating, the stew's glow intensifying with each bite. He shook his head and took another bite of his sandwich, deciding that whatever alien digestive system magic was at play, it was better left unexplored. After a few minutes, Zyra set down her spoon and looked at him expectantly. Would you like to try it? Riley stared at her, horrified. Not a chance. I like my internal organs where they are, thanks. Perhaps just a small taste, Zyra insisted, pushing the bowl slightly toward him. It would be an opportunity to expand your palate. My palate's just fine, trust me, Riley said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. I'm not risking my taste buds, or my stomach, for whatever that is. Zyra tilted her head, a mischievous glint in her eye. Are humans not known for their curiosity? I thought you prided yourselves on exploring the unknown. Riley groaned, realizing he'd walked right into that one. Fine, he said, grabbing a spoon and scooping up the tiniest amount he could manage. But if this kills me, I'm haunting you. He hesitated for a moment before putting the spoon in his mouth. The effect was immediate. A searing heat exploded on his tongue, followed by a strange, numbing sensation that spread to his lips. His eyes watered, and he grabbed his drink, gulping it down in a desperate attempt to cool the fire raging in his mouth. Are you crying? Zyra asked, her tone equal parts concern and amusement. No, Riley managed to choke out, his voice hoarse. It's just, really emotional food. Zyra's laugh was a soft trill, and she handed him a piece of her bread-like side dish. Here. This will help neutralize the effects. Riley took it without hesitation, stuffing it in his mouth and sighing in relief as the burning subsided. He glared at Zyra, who was trying, and failing, to hide her amusement. You knew that was going to happen, didn't you? He accused. I suspected it might, she admitted, her antennae twitching with what he could only assume was smugness. But you survived, and now you have experienced a part of my culture. Is that not a valuable experience? Yeah, valuable. Sure, Riley muttered, shaking his head. Next time, how about we stick to something a little less lethal? Zyra nodded, her smile softening. Very well. But I appreciate your willingness to try. Riley couldn't help but smile back, despite the lingering tingle on his tongue. You're lucky you're good company, Zyra. Otherwise, I'd be filing a complaint with HR right about now. Your sense of humor continues to intrigue me, Zyra said, her tone almost analytical. It seems to manifest even in moments of discomfort. Is that intentional? It's called coping, Riley replied with a grin. You should try it sometime. Perhaps I will, Zyra said thoughtfully, taking another bite of her stew. As they finished their meal, Riley realized that, for all the weirdness and spice-induced trauma, lunch with Zyra hadn't been half bad. Maybe, he thought, this whole cultural exchange thing wasn't so terrible after all. Riley leaned back against the workbench, wiping his hands on a rag as Zyra hovered nearby, studying a holographic diagram of the medbay's ventilation system. The peaceful rhythm of their work was shattered when a sudden burst of laughter echoed down the corridor. Riley glanced up, frowning. What's so funny? He muttered, tossing the rag aside. Before Zyra could respond, two of their coworkers rounded the corner, their faces plastered with mischievous grins. One of them, a tall, wiry human named Jackson, was holding a holographic recording device. Hey, Riley, Jackson said, barely able to contain his laughter. How's it going? You and your tools doing okay? Riley narrowed his eyes. What's that supposed to mean? Jackson exchanged a knowing look with his companion, a squat, scaly alien named Vok. Oh, nothing, Jackson said innocently. Just wondering if you had any interesting stories to share from last night. Zyra stiffened beside Riley, her antennae twitching nervously. Riley crossed his arms, his tone sharp. Cut to the chase, Jackson. What are you getting at? Well, Vok drawled, his voice dripping with mock sincerity. It's just that word around the medbay is you and Nurse Zyra had a bit of a bonding moment over your tools. Riley's stomach dropped as realization hit. You've got to be kidding me. Oh, no joke, Jackson said, holding up the recording device. A holographic projection flickered to life, displaying a grainy but unmistakable image of Zyra lying across Riley's toolbox. Got this beauty from the security cams. Riley groaned, running a hand through his hair. Seriously? You guys dug through security footage for this? Couldn't resist, Jackson said, grinning. It's comedy gold. Zyra, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, her voice firm. You invaded our privacy. This is highly inappropriate. Relax, nurse, Vok said, holding up his hands in mock defense. It's all in good fun. Fun? Zyra repeated, her tone icy. You have mocked a sacred act of atonement. That's one way to put it, Jackson said, laughing. But come on, you've got to admit it's pretty funny. Riley clenched his fists, his patience wearing thin. Okay, that's enough. You've had your laugh. Now delete it. Or what? Jackson taunted. You'll sick your nurse on us? Riley stepped forward, his voice low and steady. Or I'll make sure every piece of equipment you touch in this med bay mysteriously stops working. Jackson hesitated, his grin faltering. Vok nudged him, muttering something in their alien language. With a reluctant sigh, Jackson deleted the recording. There. Happy now? Jackson said, his tone still laced with sarcasm. Ecstatic, Riley replied dryly. Now get lost. As Jackson and Vok slinked away, Riley turned to Zyra, who looked uncharacteristically shaken. Her antennae drooped, and her usually confident posture was slightly hunched. Hey, Riley said softly. You okay? I did not anticipate this level of ridicule, Zyra admitted, her voice quiet. My actions were meant to convey respect, yet they have become a source of mockery. Riley sighed, running a hand through his hair. Yeah, well, people can be jerks. But you don't need to let them get to you. What you did, it might not make sense to most humans, but it came from a good place. That's what matters. Zyra looked at him, her large, shimmering eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and vulnerability. Thank you, Riley. Your words are comforting. Any time, Riley said with a small smile. And for what it's worth, I think it's kind of cool that you take your traditions so seriously. Even if they're a little unconventional. Zyra's antennae perked up slightly, and a faint blush tinged her cheeks. That means a great deal to me. Thank you. The moment was interrupted by a loud crash from the other side of the workshop. Riley groaned, muttering under his breath about incompetent coworkers as he grabbed his tools and headed toward the noise, Zyra close behind. When they arrived, they found Jackson and Vok standing over a disassembled ventilation panel, looking sheepish. Let me guess, Riley said, crossing his arms. You tried to fix it yourselves. Thought we'd give it a shot, Jackson said, rubbing the back of his neck. Didn't go as planned? No kidding, Riley replied, rolling his eyes. Step aside. Let the professionals handle this. As Riley and Zyra worked to repair the damage, Jackson and Vok hovered awkwardly nearby. Riley couldn't resist taking a jab at them. You know, he said, tightening a bolt, if you spent less time digging through security footage and more time learning how to do your jobs, this place might actually run smoothly. Jackson muttered something under his breath, but Vok elbowed him into silence. Zyra, meanwhile, was focused on the task at hand, her movements precise and efficient. When they finished, Riley stood back, admiring their handiwork. "They're good as new." "Thanks," Jackson mumbled, clearly humbled. "Don't mention it," Riley said, his tone pointed. "And next time, leave the tools to the people who know what they're doing." As they walked away, Zyra glanced at Riley, a small smile playing at her lips. "You are quite skilled at putting others in their place." "Years of practice," Riley said with a grin. "But seriously, don't let those guys get to you. You're doing great." Zyra nodded, her confidence returning. "I will strive to remember that." "Thank you, Riley." "Any time," he replied, meaning it. For all the chaos, working with Zyra was turning out to be a lot more rewarding than he'd expected. Riley sat at his workstation, tinkering with a handheld diagnostic scanner that had been acting up all week. The rhythmic clicking of his tools filled the silence, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Zyra had been unusually quiet since the earlier incident with Jackson and Vok. She stood across the room, carefully organizing medical supplies, her movements precise but lacking their usual energy. "Hey, you're not still thinking about those idiots, are you?" Riley asked, not looking up from his work. Zyra hesitated before answering, her voice softer than usual. "I have been reflecting on the events of today. It is disheartening to realize that my intentions could be so easily misconstrued." Riley set down his tools and turned to face her. "Look, people are always going to find something to laugh about. Doesn't mean what you did was wrong. It just means they don't get it. And honestly, who cares what Jackson and Vok think? They're not exactly winning any popularity contests." Zyra tilted her head, her antennae twitching faintly. "I understand your point, but I find it difficult to disregard the opinions of others. On my homeworld, maintaining harmony within the group is paramount." "Well, you're not on your homeworld anymore," Riley said, his tone gentler than his words. "Here, you don't have to please everyone. Just focus on doing your job and being true to yourself." Zyra considered this, her expression thoughtful. "That is a perspective I am not accustomed to, but I will endeavor to adopt it." "Good," Riley said with a nod. "Because you're doing great, and anyone who doesn't see that can shove it." Zyra's lips quirked into a faint smile, and Riley felt a small surge of satisfaction at the sight. He picked up his tools again, diving back into his work. After a few moments, Zyra spoke again. "Riley, may I ask you something?" "Sure," he replied without looking up. "What is the most significant mistake you have ever made?" she asked, her tone curious but not judgmental. Riley paused, caught off guard by the question. He set down his tools and leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "Wow, going straight for the deep stuff, huh?" Zyra nodded, her expression earnest. "I believe understanding one's mistakes is integral to understanding their character." Riley let out a low whistle. "Well, that's one way to look at it. All right, let me think." He rubbed the back of his neck, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Okay, so there was this one time I was working on a Starship engine. Big job, lots of pressure. I got a little cocky, thought I knew everything. Turns out, I missed a critical component during reassembly. The whole thing overheated and almost blew up the hangar." Zyra's eyes widened. "That sounds catastrophic." "It could have been," Riley admitted. "Luckily, someone caught it before it got that far. But I learned my lesson. Double-check everything, no matter how sure you are." Zyra nodded, her antennae twitching. "That is a valuable lesson. And it speaks to your character that you were able to learn from the experience." Riley shrugged, a little embarrassed by the praise. "Yeah, well, it's not exactly my proudest moment, but it taught me a lot." They lapsed into a comfortable silence, the earlier tension easing. After a while, Zyra moved closer, her curiosity getting the better of her. "May I observe your work?" "Knock yourself out," Riley said, gesturing for her to join him. Zyra leaned in, her antennae twitching as she studied the diagnostic scanner in his hands. "What seems to be the issue?" "It's not calibrating properly," Riley explained, handing her the device. "Take a look." Zyra examined the scanner, her long fingers deftly manipulating its controls. She frowned, tilting her head as she worked. The energy matrix appears to be misaligned. Yeah, that's what I thought too, Riley said, watching her with interest. Got any ideas? Zyra nodded, her expression focused. If we reroute the power flow through this conduit, it should stabilize the matrix. Riley grinned. Look at you, getting all technical. Go ahead, show me what you've got. Zyra set to work, her movements precise and efficient. Riley couldn't help but be impressed by how quickly she had picked up the intricacies of human technology. In a matter of minutes, she had recalibrated the scanner and handed it back to him. Try it now, she said confidently. Riley activated the scanner, watching as the display lit up and ran a flawless diagnostic. He whistled, genuinely impressed. Damn, Zyra! You're a natural. Thank you, she said, her smile widening. Your guidance has been most helpful. Don't sell yourself short, Riley said, giving her a friendly nudge. You've got a knack for this stuff. Pretty soon you'll be running circles around me. Zyra's antennae twitched in what Riley had come to recognize as her version of a laugh. I doubt that. Your experience is far greater than mine. Maybe, Riley said with a shrug. But you've got something I don't. What is that? Zyra asked, genuinely curious. A fresh perspective, Riley replied. Sometimes it takes someone looking at things differently to figure out the solution. And you've definitely got that covered. Zyra's expression softened, and for a moment, Riley thought he saw a flicker of something deeper in her gaze. Gratitude, perhaps, or maybe even admiration. Whatever it was, it made him feel a little lighter. As they continued working side by side, Riley realized that, for all the challenges and misunderstandings, having Zyra around wasn't just tolerable, it was downright enjoyable. She was smart, determined, and unafraid to dive headfirst into the unknown. And if he was being honest, she was growing on him more and more each day. Riley reclined in his chair, twirling the hybrid tool Zyra had given him between his fingers. The faint hum it emitted was oddly soothing, like a gentle reminder of the progress they'd made together. Across the room, Zyra was busy organizing medical equipment, her usual precision on full display. He cleared his throat, breaking the comfortable silence. You know, you've set a pretty high bar with this thing, he said, holding up the tool. What am I supposed to do now? Just give you a thank you card? Zyra looked up, her antennae twitching with amusement. A card would be unnecessary, though I would not object to further collaboration. I find our teamwork productive. Productive, huh? Riley said, smirking. Is that your polite way of saying I'm growing on you? Zyra tilted her head, considering his words. I would say it is an accurate observation. Despite your penchant for sarcasm, you have proven to be a skilled and reliable partner. Gee, thanks, Riley replied, his tone dripping with mock offense. And here I thought we were bonding. We are, Zyra said matter-of-factly. Though I must admit, the concept of bonding in human terms remains somewhat elusive to me. Riley leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. It's not that complicated. Bonding is just getting to know someone, building trust, finding common ground. Stuff like that. Zyra's antennae twitched again, and she nodded thoughtfully. By that definition, I believe we have made significant progress. Would you agree? Yeah, Riley said, a small smile tugging at his lips. I'd say we're doing all right. They lapsed into a comfortable silence, the hum of machinery filling the space. Riley found himself reflecting on how much had changed since Zyra had first arrived. What had started as a clash of cultures and misunderstandings had turned into something he hadn't expected, a genuine partnership. After a moment, Zyra broke the silence. Riley, may I ask you a question? Shoot, he said, leaning back in his chair. What do you believe is the most important quality in a partner? She asked, her tone curious but sincere. Riley raised an eyebrow, caught off guard by the question. You mean like a work partner? Or something else? Either, Zyra said, her gaze steady. I am interested in your perspective. Riley scratched the back of his neck, thinking. I guess trust is a big one. Whether it's work or something more personal, You've got to know the other person has your back. And it doesn't hurt if they can make you laugh. Zaira nodded, her expression thoughtful. That aligns with what I have observed about human relationships. Humor appears to play a significant role in your interactions. It does, Riley agreed. It's like a shortcut to connection. If you can laugh with someone, it's a lot easier to deal with the tough stuff. That is a perspective I will remember, Zaira said, a faint smile touching her lips. Your insights have been enlightening. Glad I could help, Riley said, grinning. What about you? What's important to you in a partner? Zaira hesitated, her antennae twitching as she considered her answer. I value integrity and commitment. Someone who is dependable, who does not shy away from challenges. And perhaps someone who is willing to embrace the unfamiliar. Riley nodded, impressed. Solid choices. Sounds like you've got pretty high standards. They are necessary, Zaira said simply. If one is to invest in a partnership, it must be meaningful. Well, Riley said, his tone light but sincere. For what it's worth, I think you're a pretty solid partner yourself. Even if you do have some unconventional ideas about tools. Zaira's laugh was soft but genuine, and Riley felt a flicker of pride at having drawn it out. I appreciate your honesty, she said. And I am grateful for your patience. I understand that my methods can be unusual. Unusual's not always a bad thing, Riley said. Keeps life interesting. They fell into silence again, but it wasn't awkward. If anything, it felt natural, like the kind of quiet that only comes with mutual understanding. For all their differences, Riley realized they'd found a rhythm that worked. And in a strange way, he was glad for the chaos Zaira had brought into his life. It had made things a lot more interesting, and a lot more meaningful.